Chosen one, your identity reveal, just shook the internet. And there mins. What if the version of you that you've been hiding from the world is actually the version everyone's been secretly waiting to meet? What if the moment you finally stopped editing yourself for public approval was the exact moment strangers started stopping mid-scroll, unable to look away? Before you keep going, I want you to sit with this question honestly. What would happen if you stopped performing the safe, expected version of yourself and simply let the real one exist out loud? Because somewhere, someone did exactly that. And it didn't just surprise people, it shook them. Are you ready to find out what that kind of honesty actually unlocks? You've been managing an image for so long, haven't you? Choosing which parts of yourself are safe enough to show and which parts you keep locked away, convinced that if people really knew you, all of you, they'd pull back, judge you, or simply not know what to do with someone that complicated. So you've built a version of yourself for public consumption, careful, palatable, easy to categorize, and underneath it, there's a quieter version of you, wondering if it will ever be safe enough to actually exist in front of other people. Have you been living as a curated version of yourself for so long that you've started to forget what the uncurated version even feels like? That question is exactly where this journey begins. The moment someone stops editing themselves, think about what actually happens when someone finally reveals the parts of themselves they've kept hidden. Not for shock value, not for attention, but simply because they're done pretending to be someone smaller and simpler than they actually are. People notice immediately, not because it's dramatic, but because it's rare. Most people spend their whole lives performing an edited version of themselves. When someone stops, it's almost impossible not to notice. That's not because the truth is scandalous. It's because the truth is uncommon. Have you ever witnessed someone drop the performance completely and felt yourself unable to look away because of how rare that honesty actually was? Why hidden identity feels safer, but costs more? It makes sense why you've hidden parts of yourself. Maybe you were misunderstood once, badly enough that you decided it was safer to simplify who you show people. Maybe you learned early that certain parts of you made others uncomfortable, so you tucked those parts away to keep the peace. But hiding, over time, has a cost that's easy to underestimate. It's exhausting to maintain a smaller version of yourself indefinitely. And worse, it means nobody around you actually knows you. They know the character you've been playing for their comfort. What has it cost you, over the years, to keep the real version of yourself hidden for the sake of everyone else's comfort? If this is landing somewhere real in you, this is exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because part 2 goes even deeper into what happens once you finally stop hiding for good. The specific kind of shock people feel when the truth arrives. Here's something worth understanding about the reaction that happens when someone reveals their true identity. The depth, the complexity, the parts that don't fit the simple story people assumed about them. It's not always a comfortable shock. Sometimes people feel almost betrayed, not because you did anything wrong, but because the edited version you gave them was the only version they knew how to relate to. That reaction says more about their limited picture of you than it does about you being wrong to finally show up honestly. Have you ever worried that revealing your full self would make people feel betrayed by the version they thought they knew? Why the internet reacts so strongly to real-eyed. Think about why moments of genuine, unfiltered honesty tend to spread so quickly online, far more than perfectly polished, curated content ever does. People are starving for something real in a landscape built almost entirely on performance. When someone finally shows up as their actual, complicated, multidimensional self, it cuts through the noise instantly, because it's the exact thing most people are secretly craving and rarely getting. That's not an accident of algorithms. That's simple human hunger for authenticity in a world saturated with performance. Have you noticed how rare true authenticity actually feels, even in a world completely flooded with content? The fear of what people will think once they know. Here's the fear sitting underneath all of this. What if people find out who you actually are, and they don't like it? What if the parts of you that feel most true also feel like the parts most likely to be judged, misunderstood, or rejected? That fear is real, and it deserves to be acknowledged rather than dismissed. But here's the question worth asking honestly. How much of your life are you willing to spend protecting yourself from a rejection that hasn't even happened yet? Are you protecting yourself from imagined judgment at the cost of actually being known by anyone at all? If this fear feels familiar, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because part 2 goes deeper into facing that fear directly. What happens to the people who can't handle the real you? Here's something worth preparing for honestly. Once you reveal your true identity, some people are going to fall away. Not because you did anything wrong, but because they were only ever connected to the curated version of you, and the real one simply doesn't fit into the box they built around you. That loss can feel painful in the moment, but it's actually clarifying. It shows you clearly who was connected to your performance versus who's capable of staying connected to the truth. Are you willing to lose the people who only wanted your edited version in exchange for being known by the people who can actually handle all of you? Why the right people get drawn closer, not pushed away. Here's the flip side worth holding on to. While some people fall away when they see your full identity, others get pulled significantly closer. People who were craving real connection, but couldn't find it in your curated version, suddenly recognize something in your honesty that resonates deeply with them. That's the group worth building your life around. Not the ones who needed the smaller version of you to stay comfortable. The reveal that shakes some people loose is the exact same reveal that draws the right people in. Who in your life might actually get closer to you, not further away, the moment you stop hiding. The courage it takes to let the reveal happen. At the center of all of this is a simple but difficult truth. Revealing your full identity requires courage that has nothing to do with confidence and everything to do with willingness. You don't have to feel completely fearless to do it. You just have to be willing to let people see you fully, even while you're still afraid of what they'll think. That willingness, more than any amount of confidence, is what actually creates the kind of reveal that shakes people. Because it's rare, and it's real, and it's exactly what so many people are quietly starving to witness. Are you willing to let yourself be fully seen, even while you're still afraid of the reaction? You've spent so long managing a curated version of yourself, believing it was safer, easier, more acceptable. But the cost of that hiding has been real exhaustion, disconnection, and a quiet loneliness that comes from never actually being fully known by anyone. The version of you that's been hidden is not something to be ashamed of. It's something the world, whether it knows it yet or not, is actually hungry to see. This is only part 1. Part 2 goes deeper into exactly what it takes to fully step into that reveal, and how to handle both the people who fall away and the people who finally, truly, see you. If this message reached something real in you tonight, Don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because part 2 continues exactly where this left off. Stop hiding. The reveal is coming, whether you're ready or not. Cousin 1. Your identity reveal just shook the internet and their minds. What if the people most uncomfortable with who you've become are the ones who knew you the longest? What if love, real love, sometimes shows up disguised as someone quietly trying to pull you back into a version of yourself you already outgrew? Stay with me here, because this one is personal for a lot of people. It's easy to expect resistance from strangers online. It's much harder to face it from someone who's known you for years, who remembers the old version of you fondly, and who, without even meaning harm, keeps reaching for that version instead of meeting the one standing in front of them now. Has someone close to you been quietly trying to pull the old you back? You've probably felt it. That strange tension with someone you've known for years, someone who used to feel completely easy to be around. Now, conversations feel slightly off. They bring up old jokes that don't quite land the same way anymore. They seem almost nostalgic for a version of you that doesn't fully exist in the same way it used to, and a little confused, maybe even hurt, by who you've become instead. That's a specific kind of loneliness. Being physically present with someone, while feeling like they're talking to a memory of you instead of who you actually are now. Have you felt like someone close to you is still talking to the old version of you, even though you've clearly moved past it? Why people miss the old version of you? Here's something worth understanding with compassion. People often miss the old version of you, not because they preferred you being smaller or hidden, but because that version was familiar, predictable, easy for them to navigate without adjusting anything about themselves. Your growth doesn't just change you. It requires the people around you to grow too, or at least adapt, and not everyone is ready or willing to do that work. Their nostalgia isn't necessarily malicious. It's often just discomfort with having to relate to you differently than they're used to. Can you have compassion for why someone might miss the old you without letting that nostalgia pull you backward? The subtle ways people try to pull you back, this pulling back rarely looks aggressive. It usually looks subtle. A joke about how you used to be more fun. A comment that questions whether all this change is really you, or just a phase. A slight discomfort whenever you set a boundary you wouldn't have set before, followed by a gentle push to just let it go, like you used to. None of that is usually intended as cruelty. But the effect is the same either way. A quiet pressure to shrink back into the shape they're more comfortable with. Have you noticed subtle comments or reactions from people close to you, gently pressuring you back toward who you used to be? If this is resonating with something real in your life, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because there's more waiting for whenever your next chapter needs this kind of clarity. Why you don't have to choose between growth and the relationship. Here's something important to hold on to. You don't automatically have to lose someone just because you've changed and they haven't caught up yet. Some relationships survive growth beautifully once both people are willing to adjust and communicate honestly about what's shifted. The relationship isn't necessarily doomed, but it does require honesty about the discomfort, instead of quietly performing your old self just to keep the peace. Have you tried having an honest conversation about the shift, instead of assuming the relationship simply can't survive your growth? What to do when the pull becomes too strong to ignore sometimes? Despite your best efforts at honest conversation, the pull to return to your old self remains constant and exhausting. In those cases, It's worth asking honestly, is this relationship asking me to grow together, or is it asking me to shrink so it can stay the same? If it's the second one, no amount of loyalty or history obligates you to keep shrinking indefinitely, just to preserve a connection that requires your smallness to function. Loyalty to a relationship should never come at the cost of loyalty to your own growth. Is the relationship asking you to grow together, or asking you to shrink so nothing has to change? If this question is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series was written. Subscribe now, because there's more waiting for whenever you need it next. The grief of outgrowing someone who isn't ready. Here's something worth naming honestly. Outgrowing someone, even someone who genuinely loves you, comes with real grief. You're not just losing comfort or convenience. You're losing shared history, familiar affection, years of memories that don't automatically disappear just because the relationship can't hold your growth anymore. That grief is valid, even while the growth itself is necessary. You're allowed to mourn a relationship changing shape, even while you continue moving forward into who you're becoming. Can you allow yourself to grieve this shift without using that grief as a reason to abandon your own growth? Why setting boundaries with old friends feels so uncomfortable, setting a boundary with someone new feels manageable. Setting a boundary with someone who's known you for years, who remembers a version of you that didn't have boundaries in the same way, feels significantly harder. It can feel like betrayal, even when it's simply growth. That discomfort doesn't mean the boundary is wrong. It just means you're doing something unfamiliar within a very familiar relationship. Discomfort in setting the boundary isn't proof you shouldn't set it. It's just proof the relationship is adjusting to something new. Have you avoided setting boundaries with old friends specifically because the history made it feel more uncomfortable than it would with someone new? The friends who actually grow with you amid all of this, it's worth remembering there are people, maybe fewer than you'd like, but real, who are actually capable of growing alongside you. They notice the shift. They get curious instead of defensive. They adjust how they relate to you instead of insisting you shrink back down. Those relationships are rare and worth protecting fiercely because they prove that lasting connection and personal growth aren't mutually exclusive. Who in your life has actually grown alongside you, rather than trying to pull you backward? If this question means something to you right now, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because there's more waiting for whenever your story needs it next. Truth for today: you are not obligated to shrink back into an old version of yourself, simply because it's more comfortable for people who haven't caught up to your growth yet. Some relationships will adjust and survive. Others won't, and that loss, while painful, doesn't mean your growth was a mistake. It simply means the relationship was built for a version of you that no longer exists. If you refuse to shrink back, even for the people who miss the old version of you, how much more fully could you finally live as who you've actually become? You've learned something today that protects both your growth and your capacity for real relationship. How to recognize the subtle pull backward. How to distinguish between relationships worth fighting for and those that simply require your smallness. And how to grieve what's shifting without abandoning who you're becoming. You don't have to choose between being loved and being fully yourself. But you do have to be honest about which relationships can actually hold both. If this message reached something real in you today, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because more of these messages are coming exactly when you need them most. Keep growing. The right people will grow with you. What if the cruelest comments you've ever received had nothing to do with you at all, and everything to do with something broken in the person typing them? What if every stranger who attacked your truth online was actually just aiming their own fear at the nearest visible target? Before you keep scrolling, I want you to picture the last comment that genuinely stung. The one you reread 3 times, the one that followed you into bed that night. Now ask yourself something you probably haven't asked yet. Did that comment ever actually know you? Or did it just react to something in itself that your honesty accidentally disturbed? Are you ready to finally separate their noise from your worth? You put something real out into the world, and instead of only meeting warmth, you met a wall of strangers with opinions about a life they've never lived a single day of. Some of them mocked you. Some of them diagnosed you from a distance, confidently, as if a few seconds of video told them your entire story. Some of them said things so sharp, you wondered how anyone could be that cruel to someone they've never met. And even though you know, logically, that strangers on a screen shouldn't hold that much power over you, their words still landed somewhere tender. They still cost you sleep, confidence, maybe even a little bit of the joy you felt right after you first became honest. Has a stranger's opinion ever managed to shrink something that used to feel completely solid inside you? Why anonymous cruelty feels different from criticism? You know, here's something worth understanding clearly. Criticism from someone who actually knows you carries context. You can weigh it against everything else you know about their character, their intentions, their history with you. Criticism from a stranger has none of that context, which means your mind, desperate to make sense of it, often fills in the gaps with your own worst fears about yourself. That's why an anonymous comment can sometimes hurt more than a hard truth from someone you love. It's not that the stranger knows something your loved ones don't. It's that the blankness of their identity gives your insecurity a wide open space to fill in whatever it wants. Have you ever noticed a stranger's comment hurting more than criticism from someone who actually knows your full story? The people who attack what reminds them of themselves. Here's a pattern worth recognizing. People rarely attack things they feel neutral about. They attack the things that stir something uncomfortable inside them. A longing they've buried, a fear they haven't faced, a version of freedom they secretly wish they had the nerve to claim for themselves. Your honesty didn't create their discomfort. It simply revealed something that was already sitting there, waiting for a reason to surface. That doesn't excuse cruelty, but it does explain it. Their aggression was never really about you. It was about something in them that your visibility accidentally lit up. Could it be that the harshest reactions you've received actually say more about something unresolved in the person typing them than anything true about you? If this reframe is landing somewhere real, that's exactly why this series exists. Subscribe now, because there's more waiting for whenever your next chapter needs this kind of protection. Why the lewdest voices aren't always the most common anons. Here's something worth remembering when the comment section feels overwhelming. Cruelty is loud, but it isn't necessarily widespread. A small number of aggressive voices can create the illusion that everyone feels that way, simply because negativity tends to shout while support tends to sit quietly in the background, unspoken but very real. For every harsh comment demanding your attention, there are usually several silent people who were genuinely moved, who needed exactly what you shared, who simply didn't feel the urge to type anything because your honesty didn't threaten them enough to react. Have you been letting a small, loud minority convince you that it represents everyone, when it's really just the most aggressive slice of the crowd? The difference between being misunderstood and being wrong. Here's a distinction that matters more than it seems. Being misunderstood by strangers doesn't mean you did something wrong. Being unfamiliar to people isn't the same as being incorrect. Most cruelty online comes from people encountering something they've never had to process before, reacting with judgment because judgment is simpler than curiosity. You are allowed to hold your ground in the truth of your own story, even while a crowd of strangers insists they understand it better than you do. Are you letting confusion from people who don't know your story convince you that you must have done something wrong? Why? You don't owe strangers an explanation. Here's something freeing, worth claiming for yourself. You do not owe every stranger a defense of your own life. You don't have to justify your choices to someone who spent 30 seconds judging a story they've never actually lived through. Explaining yourself endlessly to people determined not to understand only exhausts you and rarely changes a single mind that wasn't already open to begin with. Save your explanations for the people who've earned the right to ask, and let the rest simply pass by unanswered. How much energy have you spent trying to explain yourself to people who were never actually trying to understand you in the first place? If this is settling into you right now, that's exactly why this series was written. Subscribe now, because there's more waiting for whenever you need this kind of clarity again. Protecting your peace without disappearing. Here's a balance worth striving for. You can protect your mental space from cruelty without disappearing entirely, without shrinking your honesty back into hiding just to avoid the discomfort of strangers reacting badly. Muting, limiting your exposure, stepping away from a comment section for a while. None of that is retreat. It's simply wisdom. Choosing where you spend your attention instead of handing it freely to whoever shouts the loudest. You can stay visible and still guard your peace fiercely. Those two things were never actually in conflict. What would it look like for you to protect your peace today, without abandoning the honesty that got you here? Why the owns will stay silent often carry the most weight. Think about the quiet messages you've received, not the loud, public comments, but the private ones. Someone telling you your honesty helped them through something they never expected to survive. Someone admitting your story mirrored theirs so closely it brought them to tears. Those messages rarely go viral. They rarely make noise. But they carry more real weight than 1,000 cruel strangers ever could. Let those quiet voices anchor you, instead of letting the loud ones define your worth. Can you remember the quiet, genuine impact of your honesty, instead of only remembering the loudest voices attacking it? Truth for today: strangers online do not get to define who you are, no matter how confidently they speak or how many of them show up at once. Their cruelty reveals something about their own unresolved pain, not a truth about your worth. Their misunderstanding doesn't mean you were wrong to be honest. It simply means honesty always attracts a mixture of people, some who need it and some who resent it for reasons that have nothing to do with you at all. If you stopped measuring your worth by the volume of strangers reacting to it, and started measuring it by the quiet lives you've genuinely touched, how differently would you carry this whole journey? You've learned something today that protects you far beyond this one moment online. That anonymous cruelty carries different weight than real critique, that the loudest voices are rarely the most common ones, and that your worth was never actually up for a stranger's vote in the first place. Stay visible. Stay honest. Let the noise pass through without letting it settle into your identity. If this message reached something real in you today, don't let it end here. Subscribe now, because more of these messages are coming exactly when you need them most. Their comments don't define you. Your truth already did.